Kia ora tātou katoa.
Mr Speaker.
Denise Roche.
Tēnā koe, Mr Speaker, I te whare, tēnā koutou katoa. Whakatakata hau ki te uru, whakatakata hau ki te tonga. Kia mā kina, ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai, ki hiake ana te atakura, he tiu, he hoka, he hauhanga, tihei mauri ora. E nā mana, e nā reo, e nā rangatira mā, e nā iwi I hui nei tēnā koutou. Nā rangatira o Raukawa, nā koroma, nā kuia mā, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Mr Speaker, I am speaking with my back to the gallery to where my whanaunga are. However, I do just want to take this moment to acknowledge all the people who are in the gallery and the people who are at home watching. I am too afraid to name them personally because I might miss someone out. So I would like to take this moment just to thank them all for being here to watch this last passage of the Raukawa Treaty Settlement Bill come through the House. I'm delighted to speak on this third and final reading on behalf of the Greens, and on behalf of myself, I'm also delighted to be part of this historic occasion today. I wanted to start my kōrero with a karakia timatanga because it is such a lovely and hopeful prayer. And it's also the karakia that I said last week at the tangi of my Auntie June, who's married to my Uncle Ken. I think it's right to acknowledge the many rangatira who've passed away, not just those who've been involved in the struggle to get to this stage and the years that it's taken to do that, but also the ones who have been fighting for this for decades. And my understanding is that the fight for justice for Raukawa has been going on since the late 1860s. Tēnā koutou ia koutou tēnei mate, no reira, haere I nā mate. Haere ki te wā kāinga, haere ki te kāinga tuturu, o tō tātou mātua I te rangi, haere, haere, haere. As early as 1868, our Raukawa ancestors were attempting to use the legal processes that were imposed on them by the Crown, by the Native Land Court, to right the blatant land grabs that occurred to them. The deed of settlement and the bill itself sets out the agreed historical account where the breaches to the Tiriti o Waitangi occurred, and it's fair to say that Raukawa were punished for both their political convictions, their involvement in the kingitanga movement, as well as their involvement in the wars in the Waikato and Tauranga in the 1960s, as well as loss of life, and this has been spoken about today by the Minister Tariana Turia. So as well as the loss of life, they suffered raupatu, land confiscation, after the wars in Waikato and Tauranga in 1963-64 and the Bush campaigns in 1867. I've got to get my century right. The 1800s. The introduction of the Native Land Court, and Raukawa were not consulted on this, resulted in Raukawa being further alienated from even more land. The return of confiscated land to individual Māori resulted in the breaking down of collective ownership, basically because it's difficult to shift collectively owned land to private individuals. It says in Part 1, Clause 9, Part 7 of the bill that, and I quote, the operation and impact of the native land laws, in particular the award of land to individual Raukawa, and the enabling of individuals to deal with that land without reference to iwi or hapu, made those lands more susceptible to partition, fragmentation and alienation. This undermined the traditional tribal structures, mana and rangatiratanga of Raukawa, which were based on collective tribal and hapu custodianship of the land. The Crown failed to protect those collective tribal structures, which had a prejudicial effect on Raukawa and was a breach of the Treaty of Waitangi and its principles. And from my understanding, it's around this time that the Crown, through the Native Land Court, despite a legal challenge from the iwi, excluded the tupuna Raukawa from the tupuna associated with the Taupo Nui Atia block. There's much more in the historical accounts that records the breaches of the treaty that separated Raukawa from their land. The bill outlines that the Crown acknowledges that by 1910 the Crown and private purchasers had alienated Raukawa from more than 3/4 of their land holdings, and that before 1900 private parties and the Crown had purchased around 80% of the land, that's about 800,000 acres, within the whole of the Waikato Basin. In the legislation it states that the Crown failed to protect Raukawa from becoming virtually landless, and that this restricted their opportunities to participate in new economic opportunities and contributed to the economic, social and cultural impoverishment of Raukawa. So when we take just these issues of land loss, and that's aside the loss of life, it is apparent that Raukawa are extremely generous with this settlement. The redress package does not and cannot fully compensate for the harms that were done to them, and this is one reason why the Greens maintain that that we don't believe this is a full and final settlement. The settlement itself is made up of both commercial and financial redress and cultural redress, and I note that the cultural redress includes the birthplace of the ancestor Raukawa himself, the common ancestor of all Raukawa uri. Like others, I want to congratulate the negotiation team and the leadership of Raukawa for the tightrope they have walked to deliver this settlement bill. In my second speech, I revisited some of the overlapping interests, as others have done. As Raukawa have shared areas of interest and association with Maniapoto, Tuwharetoa, Waikato, Tainui, Te Arawa, Ngāti Koraki, Kahukura, and there are more, many more. And it's not surprising that this overlapping concerns, because Māori don't live in a jar. And as it's been noted by Raukawa themselves in their written submissions to the Select Committee, it is a finely balanced settlement to acknowledge those joint associations and interests. And Raukawa have sought creative solutions in the settlement. And as an example, there's the unusual protections of Maniapoto interests over the right of first refusal for Waikeria prison. The settlement also covers significant commercial and financial redress. When it comes to commercial redress, I always feel a bit nervous even mentioning it. Basically because of the hate speech by the ignorant, who frequently describe treaty settlements as a gravy train, and Minister Finlayson referred to that. There's a woeful lack of education or understanding from the general public about treaty settlements and about Te Tiriti generally. As a country, we've been suffering from cultural amnesia. We more often than not forget that Te Tiriti o Waitangi, the document that ensured that every non-Māori citizen has the right to live here, and that this country was not taken by force, and that the breaches of the treaty, as outlined in both the settlement deed and the more abridged version in the legislation itself, seriously undermined a sovereign people, and they have suffered to this very day. The ignorance of our own history is actually taught in schools. My daughter Matariki is 15. Last year, she attended a training seminar on the Treaty of Waitangi, which was led by real treaty educators. When she came back home, she was absolutely incensed. And as soon as she got back to school, she hit up her social studies teacher, handed over some resources, and told him that he'd been teaching it all wrong. She did do it tactfully, I think, which might be a Raukawa trait rather than a Roach trait. My daughter has had the benefit of bilingual education for her first 6 years at school, and before that she was at Kohangareo. Yet in all her time and within the education system, she has never heard the true story of Te Tiriti o Waitangi. So it's no wonder then that so often our rangatahi suffer isolation and dislocation from their culture. The true history that connects them to their land is hidden. And how can a young person step confidently into the future if their past is unknown? My daughter is here today. She's in the gallery. Her father and I decided that attending this historic occasion contributes more to her education as a young woman of Raukawa than her school could provide. I want to congratulate Raukawa because this settlement carries them forward into the future to look after all their rangatahi, and they will do that with pride and from a sound economic base. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.
Louise Upston.